Let's jump right in because today we are exploring a massive, frankly gorgeous shift in the baking world. We're talking about the stunning 2026 wedding cake texture trends, and more importantly, the exact buttercream recipes and culinary chemistry you actually need to pull them off. Let's get started.
You know that old saying about less being more? Well, for 2026 cake design, it is absolutely true. Sometimes it's the simplest cake in the room that ends up looking the most expensive. We're seeing a complete move away from chaotic decorations and those random out-of-place sugar flowers. And you know that flawlessly smooth, almost plastic look of rolled fondant? Yeah, that's out too. The industry is fully embracing design-forward simplicity, better shapes, highly intentional styling, and most importantly, incredible surface texture. The cake itself is literally becoming the canvas.
One of the biggest ways we're seeing this play out is through the plaster aesthetic. Think raw stone, concrete, or Venetian plaster, achieved by applying a stiffened buttercream with the palette knife. Honestly, what a relief for bakers everywhere. You don't have to stress over achieving razor-sharp clinical perfection anymore. Instead, this look leans entirely into the wabi-sabi philosophy, that Japanese concept of finding real, deep aesthetic beauty in the natural and the slightly imperfect. Plus, from a purely practical standpoint, this tactile, handcrafted finish catches the light and casts shadows in photos in a way a perfectly smooth cake just never could.
But hey, if the raw stone minimalism just isn't your vibe, there is a massive revival of the retro Lambeth method. This is a sharp turn back to tradition. We're talking intense, layered over piping to create these dramatic ruffles, swags, and scrollwork. But the 2026 twist? They're modernizing it into a high-fashion statement using striking monochromatic colors. Imagine the visual impact of a cake totally draped in a moody charcoal gray, or one popping in a vibrant sunset orange. It is so striking. And as a bonus, using heavy buttercream piping like this is a super budget-friendly alternative to relying on those expensive, labor-intensive fondant molds.
Okay, so here is the million-dollar question. You spend hours sculpting rough Venetian plaster or piping these heavy, intricate rows of Lambeth ruffles. How on earth do you make them hold up? We've all been to weddings where the cake is sitting out in a warm reception hall for hours. How do decorators stop those incredibly delicate piped details from drooping, blurring, or just totally melting? Well, spoiler alert, the secret isn't a magical tool, it is entirely about the culinary science of the recipe.
To pull off these gravity-defying textures, you really have to treat your frosting as an artist's foundational medium. In the baking world, this usually comes down to a heavyweight match, American buttercream versus meringue-style buttercreams. American is your classic, super sweet, incredibly easy to whip up, and it actually forms a protective crust when exposed to air. Meringue styles, though, that's the professional standard. They are silky, highly stable, and require some actual cooking, like using a double boiler or boiling sugar syrup.
Let's break down the American classic first. It's defined by its ratio, literally 2 parts powdered sugar to 1 part butter by weight. Because that massive sugar dump, it is easily the sweetest option out there. Now, if you need a base layer that sets up with a firm crust, this ratio is fantastic. But for the high-end, smooth but textured 2026 finishes, it often falls short. All that raw powdered sugar can make it feel a bit grainy, and frankly, it just doesn't have the structural integrity to hold up crisp, 3D floral petals in a warm room.
That's why the pros almost always jump over to the meringue family. But even here, you have to choose Swiss or Italian. Swiss meringue is hugely popular. You heat egg whites and sugar over a double boiler to about 65 degrees Celsius, then whip in your butter. It is deliciously silky, but because it's only heated to 65 degrees, it stays quite soft. Great for eating, but it can cause intricate piping to droop. Italian meringue, on the other hand, means cooking a sugar syrup to a blistering 118 degrees Celsius. This method creates the absolute thickest, most stable meringue possible.
Let's geek out on the exact recipe for a second, because Italian meringue is literally the holy grail for textured cakes. Step 1. You cook your sugar syrup to exactly 118 degrees Celsius. Why 118 degrees? Because at that precise temperature, you are evaporating a very specific amount of water out of the syrup. Step 2. Carefully stream that boiling syrup into your whipping egg whites. You're essentially cooking them to create a crazy, dense, stable foam. And step 3. Whip in your room temperature butter. By evaporating that water up front in step 1, you remove the moisture that causes sagging later. You've just created the ultimate stable medium.
No wonder top Korean cake artists, who are absolute legends at mind-blowing floral piping, call this a total game changer. It is the ultimate stable buttercream. It holds even the sharpest, finest flower details beautifully.
Yes, you need a candy thermometer and, frankly, some patience, but the payoff is unparalleled structure. It withstands heat like a champ, meaning those palette knife edges or Lambeth ruffles stay exactly where you put them. Plus, since the sugar is fully dissolved and cooked, you get this luxurious, smooth mouthfeel without the painful sweetness of American buttercream.
And that actually leads us right into a massive trending insider trick: Korean glossy buttercream, or GG buttercream. It's exactly the same Italian meringue recipe we just talked about, but with one incredibly simple, yet chemically brilliant twist. Instead of adding room temperature butter at the end, you beat in cold butter. That single temperature change completely alters the emulsion. The result is a frosting that is unbelievably glossy, almost transparent in color, and it holds its shape so perfectly it practically looks like porcelain. It's the ultimate heat-resistant recipe for highly detailed floral art.
All right, so we've nailed the chemistry, we've got the perfect structural recipe. Now, how do we physically sculpt it? It's all about the decorator's toolkit. To get that raw plaster look, artists rely on palette knives and offset spatulas for these sweeping, confident strokes. Then, they might drag comb tools around the sides to carve out uniform ridges or fabric-like pleats. For a more rustic, playful vibe, they'll just grab everyday toothpicks or skewers to carve swirls directly into the thick frosting. And of course, traditional buttercream tips are still a staple, but they're being used to dollop and pull really sharp, deliberate peaks.
Which brings us to the absolute pinnacle of this whole trend: palette knife flowers. Imagine taking that ultra-stable Italian or glossy buttercream recipe and, armed with just a single palette knife, literally painting directly onto the side of the cake. Bakers aren't just piping a flower and sticking it on. They are mixing custom gorgeous shades of frosting and smearing them on layer by layer. They build thick, dynamic, three-dimensional petals and leaves. The cake genuinely becomes a fine art canvas, and the deliberate imperfection of those knife strokes adds a level of romance and depth that is just breathtaking.
Ultimately, pulling off a modern 2026 cake isn't just about throwing random decorations at a tier and hoping it looks artistic. It requires a hyper-intentional balance of beauty, taste, and tradition. You simply cannot get the striking, design-forward art of these handcrafted textures without getting the buttercream chemistry right first. By understanding the structural difference between a basic crusting frosting and a meticulously boiled Italian meringue, decorators can push the boundaries of what a cake can actually be. We've covered a lot of ground today, from wabi-sabi plaster vibes and bold Lambeth piping to the absolute magic of sugar temperatures and cold butter emulsions. The toolkit is laid out and the canvas is blank. Whether you're planning a deeply personal event or you're a baker just itching to get in the kitchen and test your skills, I want to leave you with this. What texture are you going to sculpt, and which of these buttercream recipes will become your ultimate artistic medium? Get in the kitchen, start experimenting, and thank you so much